And does
Oopsie.
And what does bad sushi mean? Can we get a dream translator up in here to tell us what bad sushi means?
You need to
to
go
bring more woo
Texas.
into tech news?
You need to go Texas. Okay, top of the hour time.
Are there any dream translators in the audience?
Sounds like an involuntary pregnancy, you know?
Yeah, but that would make for an amazing clubhouse room, a dream translator room.
Yeah.
Yep.
There are
We have a
some real experts
nausea
in that
on
field.
stage.
It'd be funnier if they went at it like, with from the technical specifics, where it's like, man, this is like it touched the spiritual side, and bad pregnancy. It's like, no. That's like auto mechanics, bickering like click and clack style, but for the dream interpretation, could be pretty fun.
Sounds funny though, but I had a friend who I dated. It was kind of a weird, awkward relationship, but she had a gift for translating dreams. I think if someone taught her, and then the handful of times that I had her translate my dreams, it was like profoundly insightful in a way that I was like, that's really bizarre. And it had something to do with she would always ask me what color was the thing, and then how did I feel about that thing, and then by the end of it, you realized what the symbology of it all meant. It was really wild. But
I've done that before. I mean, but not by color, but just had very strong dreams about people that weren't necessarily close friends. And then I would see them the next day and I would tell them, and then their faces would just drop, But I can't turn it on and off though. But sometimes it's happened. I believe in it.
I found about eating bad fish. Rotten fish. Tyler, I can't believe that these things are there.
Did you have a source, a dream dictionary about bad fish?
Apparently it means you have it signifies a strange situation is happening in your life.
Okay.
The stench is related to family conflict, which causes a lot of disputes and jealousy. It is the meaning of your dreams. Rotten fish.
Let's just pull up a sofa. We can change today's format and do a little bit of psychoanalysis.
Let's just go through everybody's dreams.
Yeah, it's so-called a situation.
Yeah. So
Hey, Tyler, I just DM you the top interpretation of bad sushi dream.
Go ahead and read it.
So hold on, let me read it. Sushi dream interpretation.
Yes.
So, okay, wait. Dream about eating sushi. Eating delicious sushi in the dream indicates that you need to adopt a healthier lifestyle.
Okay.
This is about eating. Yeah, dream about eating sushi. Then dream about making sushi. Making sushi in the dream indicates that you need to address your spiritual side.
Okay.
Dream about buying sushi. Buying sushi in a dream at a restaurant foretells that you will find ways to deal with your raw emotions.
Yeah.
Raw emotions.
Okay.
Same as my story.
Hold
on. There's still a lot. Did you dream about sushi, tuna or salmon or what?
Yes, tuna.
Subway tuna specifically. Is there a specific translation for this one?
Hold on. Dream about
Luckily
tuna
it was not
sushi
sashimi,
roll. Yeah, having raw tuna sushi in the dream suggests that you have to settle for unattractive ideas and options. However, these seemingly common ideas will be highly profitable and worthwhile. Must be the buy now, pay later, I think.
Or the iPhones. Tyler's like, oh man, I don't know which iPhone I want.
Yeah, did anyone dream about iPhones last night? Maybe that's
very unfortunate and impressive.
Maybe it had something to do with iPhones, because it was kind of like, Apple's like the Giro of hardware manufacturers, and the new iPhones weren't that great. Maybe that was
bad
Tyler,
sushi.
This one, Tyler. Dream about sushi chef. Seeing a sushi chef in dreams points to someone who will make the best out of raw emotions and inputs. They will see and combine simple things into amazing combinations. Oh, that's what you do in tech news around the world.
But I think we figured. I think it has something to do with my internal processing about whether or not I'm going to buy the iPhone 13, and that it just wasn't that great.
Okay,
I like that, Anna. I like.
We need dream interpretation
by the way.
Maybe it's all the new colors.
Tyler, one more. Dream about rotten sushi. Dreaming about rotten fish growing mold is a warning that your relationship with others will come to an end. some rumors or information which will negatively impact its foundation. I don't think this is relevant. I think
Okay.
must be the one before. Yeah.
So someone,
In Iceland, you
I
eat
think
rotten
it's the
shark.
iPhone.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's iPhone related. So Pragya Dahal is the newbie on stage today. So welcome. And
Welcome.
I
perhaps
was laughing so hard.
Pragya, are you a
Hi.
dream translator?
No, just funny enough, I was just finishing a book called YBC.
She's a bookworm.
That is precisely the reason why I'm on stage, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Welcome.
And, well, I had all these questions, and obviously one book will not help you decode all these answers, but I think it's a good start. I've certainly found my answers to these questions from this book. I'm not endorsing it in any way. But
Okay, that's right. You can endorse it.
But
no.
is Nozil new as well? Nozil? The big N.
Oh, sorry.
No, we have another gentleman on stage called Nozil. Is he new?
Hey.
No, Nazil's old school. He defiantly keeps his very Windows 95 style icon.
Nazil's old school. He's new again.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a Microsoft consultant. Okay.
Yeah. So the big headline, perhaps no surprise, is Apple announces iPhone 13 and 13 mini with similar design to iPhone 12, smaller notch, an A15 chip, diagonal dual camera system, larger battery, and 5 new colors. And maybe it's the colors that brought about the sushi.
When you lift and swing, you're going to be able to throw your legs back someday in the future.
So, and then they also released a 13 Pro and 13 Pro Max and
new iPhones.
I think
it's a yawner,
we
folks.
were expecting satellite and all kinds of things, and kind of fizzled out.
Yeah, the biggest announcement is the color. I mean, it's oh boy.
So
but I miss real innovation. I miss really the innovation part. It's just
we were
a little
talking
bit better, a little bit the
satellites,
same.
biometrics. We were talking crazy things with like AI analysis stuff, and we got new colors.
Yeah, it's just colorful ways of taking your money.
The Apple A15, a system on a chip with 2 different products. Apple's release iOS 15. Oh, so the iOS 15 date is released, so it's September 20th, so 5 days from now, which is Monday. So Monday we all get the new operating system, iOS 15.
How long can we opt out?
And Apple releases new MagSafe wallet with Find My Network. There's just a ton of Apple-related headlines of all types. So I'll spare reading through all of them, but none of them are particularly earth-shaking, I should say. So the next
$1 trillion market cap company, folks.
Yeah, the question is, will Apple get to 3 trillion? They're at 2.5 trillion. And what will it take to get them to 3 trillion? And when is the MacBook Pro event? Jesus. Oh, that's what I want to see. The M1X MacBook Pros.
That's what it is. We were 16, 32 cores or something like that and just be a beast. And
I'm a little,
we haven't
I'm a little
seen
concerned Apple might be kicking into an Intel pace of innovation here. What happens is they say, oh, we're doing TikTok cycles. We'll do innovation this year. And then
the old days when you have the number and then the S, the 5S,
yeah,
and
exactly.
then 6.
Yeah, this would have been the increment. I mean, besides that, these incremental annual updates, it's hard to have growth once you get to this scale. So it's just,
There's no more.
It's like, this is the year that this is finally the event they announced the new glasses, because we've been having this for 4 years now, and it's been very entertaining watching how confident people are wrongly about this is the year.
Yeah.
But they subtly revealed the Apple shoes.
Say what?
You are saying that they're wearing the same shoes, right? So it's
interesting. Tim Cook and Jaws were wearing the same shoes. What does the book say about that, Cheryl? So then the device to 2 wireless controllers when in use and does not support microphones. The SEC charts interesting, accusing it
had to be pretty bad for them to intervene on this.
Yeah. Accusing it of engaging in deceptive practices and misrepresenting its data. App Annie will pay a $10 million settlement. The SEC and the Securities and Exchange Commission announced Tuesday that it's charging App Annie the mobile app data provider with a $10 million. Those who don't know, App Annie is where app developers go to track their, how downloads are going with apps. And you can see how well apps are doing, and journalists often use it to get a sense for how a company's doing, and it's an interesting data point. But it says here in the article, securities fraud, accusing the company of engaging in estimates of app downloads, usage, and revenue. That's the other part too, is it tells you how much money apps have made, which if you know the number of downloads and you know how much they're charging per download, well, then you have a sense for the revenue. So, which they sell estimates of app business estimates. But the SEC accuses App Annie and its former CEO and chairman of reneging on that promise and using actual performance data to tweak its estimate models between 2014 and 2018. That's why the SEC is involved. That's kind of insider trading-ish. Wow. And misled those customers into thinking that the data was compliant with federal securities laws, which obviously it wouldn't be. So, App Annie, to participate in it, you as an app developer have to give them access to your downloads, your data. So they do know how many apps, how many times your app has been downloaded and how much revenue you've made, and blah, 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 blah. And then some clever, greedy ground. We would love some of that recently IPO'd, and we would love to know how many times that thing's been downloaded. Maybe you could give us a little glimpsey data there. And the App Annie's telling the developers, oh, we never share your data. We obfuscate it. We anonymize it. And it turns out they weren't. Basically, it seems, according to this, the Wall Street traders had access to data. It says here, App Annie and Schmidt lied to companies about how their confidential data was being used, and then not only sold the manipulated estimates to their performance and stock prices. Because if you can see day by day app download, because many apps, for example, are their revenue is their app downloads. Not all, but many apps, their revenue is purely, exclusively how. And so, using App Annie, you could know just as well as the CEO knows, and be able to calculate and extrapolate and precisely how much revenue a company has made. And if you know precisely how much revenue a company is making before it reports, to the market on the quarterly earnings reports, you could trade.
So the question is buy ahead of the market, essentially trade on data no one has access to. Yours for only $10,000 a thing. Like, was there like a one pager? Was there like a sales sheet? Was it like someone they had as a biz dev person? Like, because I mean, how much did they do self incrimination on this one? Because when you start basically saying you can trade on the spy browse in certain circles, like this sounds like something you want especially egregious to get SEC involved. Because I mean, tech has all sorts of scandal stuff that you could do on things, but this one was like, were they just extra blunt about it? What common caught?
It doesn't say how this scheme unraveled, because this is so lucrative for everybody involved. Yeah, how does it? Maybe the apps. I'm not aware that the SEC does do that. They might.
Right. I'm just kind of trying to look into the future.
Whistleblowing,
the crystal ball, or like, what is SEC going to get involved in more of these types of things? Because essentially regulation isn't kicking in on other sectors, or it's like all right, we'll just pick on the fraud side. I mean, because like there is so much theft happening on like there's the internet is how much the internet is fake thing from like a few years back from like from the New York Post, and they're showing how the advertising metrics that they sell to marketers with things are just outright just fabricated in many cases. And you could seriously go after groups essentially just for outright fraud there, but I've seen almost no action on that regards, at least publicly, on things. So it's interesting that when they go after antitrust, they go after all these different angles rather than the more obvious one of fraud that actually affects the core bottom line.
Conduct alleged covers period right before the GDPR went into effect. This is big news. App Annie settling with SEC for $10 million for securities fraud. App Annie promised app developers and HF clients' app data was anonymized when put into App Annie's models. It wasn't. Then App Annie encouraged clients to trade on the model's exploitations. Somebody says on Twitter, is there a more useless promise in tech than it's anonymized?
Yeah, when someone says that, something's going wrong.
When we only used aggregated, it actually means... Okay, so the next one's from Bloomberg. Last week's court ruling leaves the door open for Apple to still attempt to collect 30% commission from app developers who use their own payment methods. And that's... We talked about this when we were here right before the iPhone event, 12 hours ago. And that's a concerning new realization that Apple might still try and get to 30%. We'll see.
They need that to fuel their innovation.
Apple
might get another color out next time for all those billions of dollars collected for this thing.
And the next one up is Microsoft fixes over 80 vulnerabilities, including 20 Chromium security bugs and a critical zero-day vulnerability in
That
MS
Microsoft guy
HTML.
left. The Microsoft guy left.
Oh no.
Well, maybe he went back to go fix the bugs, but
that's what I was getting at, is that he just found out about the bug.
It's like, oh crap.
Another vulnerability. Another day, another Microsoft. Well, in this case, it's 80 vulnerabilities. So it's...
they fixed a few on some other groups kind of thing. It's spread it nice and even with the bugs. Nice to know how.
And here I was feeling like Microsoft was super secure. So this is a real heartbreak.
Hey, it's good enough for the government work. It's good enough for your personal security.
So the next one's from Forbes. It says collaborative graphic design app Canva, which is sort of Photoshop in a browser, basically. And you go to canva.com and you play around with the images and you move things around and you're like, holy shit, this is better than Photoshop. Like, for the vast majority of work that people do online, it's truly fantastic. And
Slayer of graphic design careers.
Yeah, and you will say to yourself, well, I don't need Photoshop anymore. Like, this is...
Why do I need to hire a graphic designer? I can just click a few buttons.
That too. It makes you feel, the same way that Instagram makes people feel like they actually know how to do photography. Canva makes you gives you the feeling that you actually have some kind of graphic design sense. And Canva, here's the important part, is, in my mind, why didn't Photoshop push more towards a browser version of Photoshop that's a more like Canva? Because Canva now has raised $200 million at a $40 billion valuation.
Yeah, I was going to say 200
on
40?
40? Seriously?
Yes.
Like, what, a 2%?
Yeah.
Is capital that desperate these days?
Its founders pledged to give away 30% of Canva to charitable causes. Wow. Canva is now one of the world's most valuable startups after raising $200 million in a new funding at a $40 billion valuation. Sweet Jesus. And Adobe's thinking, why the shit didn't we do that?
And PowerPoint. I love the way it replaces that as well.
Yeah, I use Apple Keynote to as a version of Photoshop as well.
I have a funny thing on the PowerPoint thing. So how you saw a while back that Microsoft got like a $22 billion for the HoloLens. I have a comical thing where I was doing the tech analysis on why the military actually spent all that money on it. I would say that the reason why is they actually bragged internal things about how it's compatible with all their existing content. So I'm like, okay, you're going to use an advanced holographic interfaces to display military PowerPoint slides in a way that you can do eye checking. So if the soldiers are actually looking at your PowerPoint slides as an agent general. So de facto, that would mean that PowerPoint has another $22 billion put into it as its valuation. So if you want to make a lot of money in tech, apparently just come up with a pretty way of drawing little pre-pictures on little slide decks. Apparently that's the future.
Do Canva have a mobile application?
I imagine they must have
the Canva XR thing.
Imagine if they're a $40 billion valuation company, I would assume they have an iPhone.
Yeah, that's where I was going with that, Chris. I'm wondering if they've got some sort of integration that investors know about that they're working on, maybe within the app ecosystem.
Some like big
will integrate with everything
said.
existing. Yeah, it'll integrate with Facebook, integrate with Instagram.
But raising 200 million at a 40 billion valuation.
Are they just like
That's
giving money
amazing.
away at that point? I mean, like the pressure on those guys internally is like, what happens if they miss a target? Does the entire equity just like go somewhere else? Is it some like boardroom politics? That's just insane.
Can you imagine the Shark Tank shark's face? You're like, I'm coming in and I'm asking for 200 million for 2% of my company.
Okay, I'm turning down my volume a little bit because Carl let me know I seem a little bit louder than historically. So hopefully this is back where it used to be. So the next one's from Reuters that Uber's CTO named Sukumar Rathnam has resigned after a year in the position amid tensions with Uber Chief Product Officer Sundeep Jain. So it's and then the CEO is Dara. So you've got a whole lot of Middle Eastern Asian folks running the show over at Uber.
Where did all the money come from? It's mysterious.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, you don't necessarily think of Uber as being, they kind of keep low profiles over there. But
they took some SoftBank money. If you take SoftBank money, your VPs started to look really, really certain ethnicities real quick.
Uber Chief Technology Officer is stepping down as the company's head of engineering. Business Insider reported on Tuesday, citing people familiar with the matter. And they just lost a lawsuit. Well, this case in the Netherlands that basically the Netherlands decided that Uber drivers are employees, and now this CTO steps down. Uber's going through a bit of a rough patch. It's unclear how
it's nothing the lawyers can't handle.
Well, and it's nothing bigger than what they've gone through other rough patches previously. But interesting to see how it shakes out. I think they need to get into the autonomous game because if they get
they got out of it though. They had a whole self-driving car division. They sold off essentially to Aura with things.
Since that moment, I've been a little confused because that's the long-term play.
That was the whole reason they were going to be able to escape the labor stuff with things.
Correct.
And it's like, oopsies. But by the way, internally with things, the viz.gl, all the engineers that were on that division, they did some amazing internal work for like the visualization libraries and the pathing and such. One of the things that's actually came from that was actually kind of a good thing was on their way out the door, they open sourced their entire internal stack for the data visualization for the ride mapping and stuff. So it's Google, I think, is doing it to the Linux Foundation. Google's sponsoring it now. But there's some amazing libraries for visualization if people want to play with that. It's very well coded. That was one of the side effects of them spinning off their autonomous division there.
The next one is from Gizmodo that Anonymous claims to have stolen huge. Anonymous is a
FBI front organization at this point.
It's a bunch of anonymous figures working collaboratively to do kind of use hacking as a means of justice from their perspective.
Just go watch Mr. Robot. It's more or less that.
Yeah. But anyway, so when I say Anonymous claims to have stolen, I mean Anonymous is an organization, although an intentionally anonymous organization who calls themselves Anonymous. So Anonymous claims to have stolen a huge trove of data from Epik, the right wing's favorite web host, the controversial domain registrar Epik, which has been known to host Nazis and other unfortunate groups, apparently just had all of its data stolen. Members of hacktivist collective Anonymous claim to have hacked web registration company Epik, allegedly stealing a decade's worth of data, including reams of information about its clients and their domains. So this could then lead to further hacks on those folks.
Charles is here.
Okay, let's get your hand up in the air there, Charles.
Charles, raise your hand.
Epik is controversial, having been known to host a variety of right-wing clients, including ones that previous web hosting providers like GoDaddy have dropped for various reasons. Its users have included conservative social media networks, Parler and Gab, as well as conspiracy theory-laden YouTube wannabes and former President Trump fan site The Donald. The company recently hosted blah, 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 blah. So I think you get the idea here. The data set is all that's needed to trace actual ownership and management of the fascist side of the internet, and that's eluded researchers, activists, and well, just about everybody. So that's why I'm saying the bigger news here is not that they hacked the registrars, that they now have access to a lot of data that is now very valuable for them to. So I guess Epik is revealing this because Anonymous would not have revealed this. They would have used that data. They don't want to blow the whistle and let their future victims know that they now have access to their data.
One more data point here on underlying web infrastructure things, DNS records and such. The way the internet is architected is supposedly it was built in a way where you could basically access in direct point-to-point from anywhere, but because essentially so many of those layers have been abstracted, in practice you have to get permission from a small number of gatekeepers. One of the factors there, Cloudflare era, I think during the time frame of who's going to host the Daily Stormer and stuff, Cloudflare essentially, while normally they basically are we stay out of essentially who's hosting what type of kind of factor, CEO intervened there and actually kicked essentially them off. And one of the factors, as he said, I shouldn't have this power. He actually posted some op-eds in the New York Times and says there's actually a small number of gatekeepers that can do this with the internet. We should seriously consider the political implications of this long term. So that was one factor. And so groups like Epik kind of fill in kind of that missing infrastructure components. But there's going to be others. And yeah, you're going to see more of this in the future.
Does somebody have a headline to jump into? I got to...
Does Charles want to comment on that one?
Yeah, I'll be back in 3 minutes if somebody has a separate headline.
I've got a headline.
Go ahead
for this.
I'll comment on it. I mean, I don't think people should commit crimes against people on the internet, right? So hacking people is a crime. Now the interesting question is this a crime that the U.S. government's going to look the other way on because it wants to also take these things off the air? And that I don't know, but I do think it's interesting.
Let's see. I got a headline here from this is from Intuit. Actually, they just purchased MailChimp. Yeah, and you probably already covered this one with things, but of interest for this one is that they basically spent $12 billion about expanding their small business focus. By the way, these are from the makers of TurboTax, the ones that lobby to make sure that essentially you have to basically file your taxes by hand. They've got $12 billion to spend on essentially telling you about it in the email as well. So more fun things in the future. Let's see.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out yesterday on that, Chris, what the motivation is behind that, because MailChimp is kind of fallen behind both in feature set and pricing plan wise, a lot of other really great alternatives. And the only thing we could really think of was the historical data, basically, the 11, 12 million customers, the 4 to 5 billion sort of people they can reach. Who are the target to the mailing campaigns, but is that worth the money that?
So it's not just the customer list; it's the customers that pay money. That's the thing. Is some of the one of the reasons the legacy groups essentially have so much more with this is because you can trade on leverage for this when you're basically not trade on leverage with things where you're doing investments and stock market stuff, but you can do some really fun financial tricks when you say, hey, look, this company has basically had steady revenues for 10 years and it's a tech company, and now when we juice it together with our other company, we can basically say the valuation is going to be worth X amount more. Now it's kind of a fantasy, but this is a sort of magic math that allows Yahoo to constantly get traded around. There was the Oath type kinds of stuff back in the day. It's not because it actually works, but on paper it looks fantastic. And a lot of mergers and acquisitions people, they all get percentages of these things when the dollar amounts get obscene. And if you have a long running company, you can plug that into the spreadsheets where you would normally put something like civil infrastructure or a real estate deal. You put in a tech valuation number in there, and it gets very magical very quickly.
I don't know. I mean, Intuit, they want to have a relationship with the next big companies, right? And so it's probably a pretty good deal. I mean, Intuit's valued at 150 billion, somewhere around there. And here's just 12 billion to basically have access to all the data and the relationship with all the new startups. And it's something that's not venture backed, right? It's a bootstrap company. So yeah, I mean, I think it's I actually think it's kind of a good deal, and they probably made. I mean, it seems like the right decision to make at the time. And if you're into it, I mean, you can't really afford like a Salesforce or others like buying this company, right? So that's sort of the thinking on it, because otherwise you're in a sort of like you're in a bind.
I mean, how much more can they grow? I mean, there's only so many people that can file their taxes by force of by some regulatory thing.
Intuit's been trying to expand into the home mortgage space, and they're facing all this increased pressure by the decentralized companies, the new innovators in the space. And when you buy a company like MailChimp, you can blend in a bunch of those users into your GAAP accounting and say you added 45,000 users, when in reality, net users out of that group might be much smaller because you already have those users.
That's a very expensive sleight of hand if that's the case.
So next headline, or are we in the middle of something?
No, go for it. Go for it. We were just talking about TurboTax because
yeah, we
know that's everyone's favorite program.
For you.
So the next one is that Solana has been suffering a network outage for around 8 hours, which engineers say is caused by network exhaustion. Validators can restart if necessary. Solana, a rival blockchain network to Ethereum, and one whose native cryptocurrency has surged in value recently, apparently down due to be a victim of its own success lately.
Are they telling people to turn it off and turn it back on again?
Yeah. So the next one is an investigation into the Minneapolis school district's use of Gaggle during the pandemic shows how moderators subject students to relentless digital surveillance. A week after the pandemic forced Minneapolis students to attend classes online, the city school district's top security chief, got an urgent email, its subject line in all caps, alerting him to potential trouble. Just 12 seconds later, he got a second ping, and 2 minutes after that, a third. In each instance, the email warning Jason Matlock of questionable content pointed to a single culprit. Kids were watching cartoon porn. Over the next 6 months, Matlock got nearly 1,300 similar emails from Gaggle, a surveillance company that monitors students' school-issued Google and Microsoft accounts. Through artificial intelligence and a team of content moderators, Google tracks the online behaviors of millions of students across the U.S. every day. The sheer volume of reports was overwhelming at first, Matlock acknowledged, and many incidents were utterly harmless. About 100 were related to animated porn, and on one occasion, a member of Gaggle's remote surveillance team flagged a fictional story that referenced underwear. Hundreds of others, however, suggest imminent danger. In emails and chat messages, students discussed violent impulses, eating disorders, abuse at home, bouts of depression, and as one student put it, ending my life. At a moment of heightened social isolation and elevated concern over students' mental health, references to self-harm stood out, accounting for nearly a third of incident reports over a 6-month period. In a document titled My Education Autobiography, students at Roosevelt High School on the south side of Minneapolis discussed bullying, drug overdoses, and suicide. Kill me, one student wrote in a document titled Goodbye. Nearly a year after the 74 submitted public records request to understand the Minneapolis district's use of Gaggle during the pandemic, a trove of documents offer an unprecedented look into how one school system deploys a controversial security tool that grew rapidly during COVID-19 but carries significant civil rights and privacy implications. The data gleaned from those 1,300 incident reports in the first 6 months of the crisis highlighted how Gaggle's team of content moderators subject students to relentless digital surveillance long after classes end for the day, including on weekends, holidays, late at night, and over the summer. In fact, over about a quarter of incidents were reported to district officials on school days between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., bringing into sharp relief how the service extends schools' authority far beyond the traditional powers to regulate student speech and behavior, including at home. Now, as COVID-era restrictions subside and Minneapolis students return to in-person learning this fall, a tool that was pitched as a remote learning necessity isn't going away anytime soon. Minneapolis officials reacted swiftly when the pandemic engulfed the nation and forced students to learn from the confines of their bedrooms, paying more than $355,000, including nearly $64,000 in federal emergency relief money to partner with Gaggle until 2023. By the way, that's that expensive for a
That's
tool
actually
like that.
That's actually pretty cheap.
Right. And this journalist has never had a startup and
That's for
has,
all of Minneapolis?
yeah. I mean, I was making more than that from one client, on my little tiny startup. So it's like,
Who's the poor guy that has to watch cartoon porn every day and do customer service on that
yeah.
one?
But I love how this journalist is like, they made $355,000 from the
I guess the
Minneapolis school
journalist is
district.
like, I'm making 30 grand
Like,
for my clickbait article, so it's like
I
everything
would
is
have
big.
charged 4 times that. So again, it's just people
Can
doing
we just call this
journalism.
American social credit and be done with it? I mean, it's like we're building a surveillance utopia. We get it.
Faced with a public health emergency, the district circumvented normal procurement rules, a reality that prevented concerned parents from raising objections until after it was too late. I'm a little confused. Is Gaggle? Are you making Gaggle out to be a good thing or a bad thing here? Because you're pointing out what a whole lot of incredibly important revelations about students and their psychology that could be incredibly valuable, and yet you're concerned that they were paid money and that they're being surveilled after hours. I get all that. Anyway, with each alert, so the article goes on and on. Needles in haystacks. Wow, very long article.
Kids don't have rights. We news at 11.
Yes. Where Gaggle tracks students' online behavior. Oh, and so it's using, in Minneapolis, a majority of Gaggle incident reports over the 6 periods identified keywords. So they can monitor everything going on in your Google account. So, for example, when you have it's almost like
that's more interesting.
It's almost like an extension for, when you add in an app into your Google ecosystem, it says it would like access to your calendar and your email and your Hangouts and your Google Drive. That's what this app does. It gets access to everything in your Google account, and then it monitors everything. And it turns out that a lot of the student online behaviors come from a mix of Google Drive and Google Hangouts and email.
Tyler,
yes.
There's actually a much more interesting meta story here. So one of the reasons why Apple was able to take over to the level that it was is establish a very strong foothold in the media sector with things with content creators. Part of that was because they made sure that every single classroom had a media center with donated Apple equipment, so that all the kids grew up saying, "Oh, you want to have fun, you want to make media content? Well, use the Apple computers in the computer lab." So that was a big thing. It's like investing in the future, so you can have dominance like 10, 20 years later. Jobs was brilliant for having a vision for that far into the future. Now, Google got a little jealous of some of that, so they've actually been doing this for 10, 12 years. They're actually going to have some of the first kids graduating from this, where they said, let's flood the market with Chromebooks, cheap little Chromebooks, and it basically make it the dominant thing in all of education. And they did. It's basically, when you basically are in a classroom now, you have a Google account for every single kid. And to the point where every single application has, whether or not essentially you're able to move data from program to program, Google has become an arbiter of that. Now, the way that they basically, I said to the administrators, they said, no, it's okay. You control the students' data with things. And one day when they turn 18, they'll be able to click a magical button. It'll convert into a normal account with a thing. Then Google will basically have every bit of data since kindergarten on the kids. But this is kind of a meta, kind of a preview of the sorts of data sets that will be available when they click that magic button in the future and they turn 18. But it looks like they're getting a little greedy on the first side with things, of saying, well, if you've got third parties, you can actually kind of have intervention between now and then. So that's one way around COPA stuff. It's going to get crazy.
So the article, hold on one second here. It says to Matlock, who's the school director, on this digital stuff, Gaggle is a lifesaver, literally. When the tool Gaggle flagged a Minneapolis student suicide note in the middle of the night, Matlock said he rushed to intervene. In a late-night phone call, the security chief said he warned the unnamed parents, who knew their child was struggling but didn't fully recognize how bad things had become because of Gaggle. School officials were able to get the student help. To Matlock, the possibility that he saved a student's life offers a feeling he can't even measure in words. If it saved one kid, if it supported one caregiver, if it supported one family, I'll take it. He said that's the bottom line. So
I mean, there's a school to prison pipeline as well with things. So I mean, that's that school district. There's another one that
So
could go the other way. So I mean,
what
it's
I would also add is that Roosevelt High School is one of the closest high schools to the George Floyd murder, and I also know that carjackings in and around Minneapolis, St. Paul, they rose exponentially. And I don't know if it was across the U.S., but I know for a fact, in talking with friends and former neighbors in Minneapolis, that it was a major, major issue about a year and a half ago. So I would imagine that the school district officials are thinking, okay, our kids are in dire need. They're experiencing collective trauma and all other types of stressors, kind of related to what's happening in the city and compounded in many cases with what's happening in their own neighborhoods and homes. So I imagine that that's why someone on the school district or someone within the district on the school board thought, well, it might be good to know what's really going on inside of their lives. That would be my take on why they may have chosen to partner with Gaggle and do what would seem to be an overreach in terms of kind of peeking into the students' lives. And as we talked about in the last segment, that's also a high school where most of the kids, they don't have the benefit of having to parents who are who are able to put the children at the center of their lives. There are a lot of compound issues that kind of play out in that community. So
I mean,
If I
the
like,
same logic can work for essentially them in the high school level, but can also work in the college level with things for university. And hey, we might as well have the mayor for a city essentially have the same level of data access. I mean, the thing is, what you train kids for as accept as normal, with their rights they're given, or essentially things that essentially or that they have that they're ignored in one way, respect or another. This is what becomes the dominant pattern for the rest of their life. So if you want to basically normalize surveillance, you start young. If you want to normalize essentially more independence, you start young. If you want more collectivism, you start young. So I mean, I think it would be really, really interesting if we had a more formal definition of the kind of society that we want, and then we basically train kids for it now. Because right now, as it is, it's available for the highest bidder. It feels like because so little investment is made in this space. The fact that Pearson's the largest company in the edtech sector and they're less than a $3 billion company is kind of sad, considering essentially that's supposedly our entire future. That there's groups that essentially are willing to drive 10, 20, 30x multiples like we saw for a freaking graphic design company for Canva or whatever. You would think that essentially having the collective curricula for all of the kids in the future would be worth more on that side. But that's a longer argument for things. But kids' future should be more expensive than the cheapness we put on it.
I think
Absolutely. I mean, and just one little, punctuation to that is that, the neighborhood in which Roosevelt High School is located is kind of the poster for a neighborhood that is over policed and underprotected. And so these kids and their families, they're already being surveilled upon. So I don't know that it's too
Actually,
much of an exception
actually,
from what's actually happening.
yeah, Lakeisha, they actually banned facial recognition in Minneapolis, which coincided with one of the larger crime waves there. And according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, Minneapolis is actually quite under policed now in the last few years, and that's in large measure because of things like bail reform that were recently passed in Minnesota. So
Charles, is there a map anywhere of the places where facial recognition is explicitly recognized as being okay or banned in certain areas? Because that map is, I imagine, it's very colorful recently.
And what I would
yeah,
say
I
to
mean,
that is that within Minneapolis, like many cities, you have highly affluent areas of the city, and then you have areas that are not. And so I would imagine that if we were to look at a map, there would be some areas of the city where there is a lot of policing that happens, and then there are others that there is not, just based on the demographics.
yeah, no, just to be clear about this, this is a sort of factual point, and it's something that the Biden administration has actually taken very seriously. And kind of ironically, Trump, who was supposed to be like Mr. Law and Order, had actually presided over one of the larger increases in violent crime and rapes, murders, muggings, carjackings across sort of urban America. And it's interesting, there are hotspots in these areas, and there's some work being done right now, Chris, on the effect of facial recognition bans. And I have chosen not to fund that research because I want it to be like a clinical kind of work that's done by the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And the research thus far shows that there is an increase in crime, both when you couple bail reform with facial recognition bans. And so this is one of those situations where there was a lot of sort of fake news about facial recognition being more racially discriminatory towards minorities. That was only true of the facial recognition products that were developed in Asian countries. It's not true of the American ones, or even the Israeli ones, to give credit to them. So there's just a lot, there's a lot of research here, and I would just commend people who are interested in actually just who are stats people, not trying to be political, whatever, that they just look into things like the most recent work that was done on this was the district attorney's office in Harris County. They began to do a lot of statistical work around bail reform in Texas. Houston is actually kind of a representative city for a lot of crime work that's done. So anyway, just interesting work. I don't want to belabor the point, but yeah, anyway, get the idea.
I brought Madad Kiani. Welcome to Tech News Around the World. And then also there was Meg Davis, who this seems like it's, I imagine you had your hand raised related to the school thing, given your background.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tyler. Really great conversation and really important issues. I'm just catching up with the story, but to me, this seems like I lead a digital health and rights research project at the Graduate Institute in Geneva, Switzerland. And this really seems to me like another instance of government's expansive surveillance during the COVID pandemic. And while we understand the concerns and the real need for a better understanding of how our kids have been affected by the pandemic, at the same time, my question is, and I'm still reading the article, but what happened to the data? And these kids, so when they graduate from high school, does their data get deleted? Or does it just stay with Gaggle, as a treasure trove? I mean, is that why it was, relatively low cost?
Imagine you watch Furry Porn once as a 12-year-old, and now essentially this is now in your permanent profile for all of time, immortalized essentially in the data sets for marketers for the rest of your life that you can never escape.
My understanding is that the data quality in this particular case wasn't very good. And that in fact, yeah.
Meg has a great point, because you combine that with the fact that people get canceled for saying something inappropriate 10 years ago. I mean, I can foresee somebody's running for mayor 30 years from now, and they said they were when they were 13 they said they were going to kill themselves, or they looked at some porn when they were 14 years old on this guy, some cartoon porn when you were 14, and now you're running for mayor 30 years later. Sorry, you can't, your life's over because
looks like it's right. Homeschooling for my kids.
That's what they threatened us with. That's
but also that data is going to be used to inform algorithms. It's going to be used to drive kids' attention in different ways. So, it's going to have multiple uses. It's a great boon for Gaggle. But anyway, thanks. Very interesting discussion.
Such a great point, Meg. Thank you for that.
They threatened us with a permanent record when we were kids that didn't exist.
Yes, they said it'd follow us for
Here
all of our life.
And now it actually exists.
We didn't even know what a permanent...
There's a possible take
I remember
on.
My high school was one of the first high schools in the country to get Facebook, and I was the last of my friends. And the first thing and only thing I put up on Facebook for the longest time was, I think this is a really bad idea, but Tina's making me do it, and she's my girlfriend. And it's now been quite a number of years, and Tina recently reminded me that I had made that post half of my lifetime ago. And I do think the permanent record has long been here, and we've been participating in it. But I do think this sort of automation of the permanent record, starting with young kids, is kind of sick. And on that point, I don't know, I assume you guys already talked about the Wall Street Journal story, about how Facebook has admitted in internal documents that 1 in 3 girls in teenage years are sort of having difficulties largely brought about because of Instagram. And the ways in which, they're sort of shades of big tobacco here, where basically Facebook knew that the Instagram algorithm was hurting, basically teenage girls, and essentially did very little to do anything to mitigate that.
No, they made money with it.
They were talking about their body
image. More crazy.
That was we covered that at length yesterday. That was probably our biggest story yesterday.
An hour, yeah.
I have a fun little anecdote. It's very short. The University of Colorado, there's a professor there essentially is doing facial recognition tech or whatever, right? And I asked him essentially like how they were training the data sets. He's like, "Oh, we got a camera. We can actually like see everyone on the campus as they're going between classes and recognize them and basically predict where they're going to be and stuff." And this is going for military algorithms. I'm like, "Do the students realize this?" And he's like, "Well, it cleared an ethics board, so that should be good enough." And I'm like, "Do the students realize it?" It's like, "Nah, we don't need to ask their permission." So it's like, okay. But then I asked him an interesting question. I was like, "So what do you have for your Facebook profiles and stuff?" He's like, "Oh, I don't put my face out there with things. I don't want anyone to like look at that stuff." So I'm like, "Well, what do you have?" And he's like, "Well, I've got pictures of my cat." And essentially, I asked all my friends to tag all the pictures of their cats as well. So whenever Facebook basically tries to basically see me, they think that I'm a cat. Apparently, he's having a lot of fun screwing with their algorithms. When you start seeing actual people that basically have knowledge of how the algorithms work, actually try to actually modify the things and actually have them like work or not work, I think it's going to get a lot more interesting. For right now, it's very much in a people are still not really understanding what these things can do and not do, and so you have these really weird random articles about like, oh no, someone was black and they got misfiled as essentially as relation to some sort of animal, and it's like, okay, that's one aspect, but there's a lot more interesting components about this stuff. There's just a surface level understanding here. So
Hey,
it's going to be
Chris,
interesting on the more interesting stuff.
I have a confession on my Facebook. For the past 2 years, all I've done is take memories and reserve them back to Facebook.
So
I'd like to
there's.
ask a quick question, if possible, Tyler,
Go
on the
ahead.
whole sort of permanent record thing and everything else that we were just talking about, and on the school aspect. One thing on that is just quickly like that. When I was in high school, my school email address and everything else and everything that I used for the computers that I used while I was in there, I knew that was being tracked. I told that was being tracked. I just wouldn't use it. I mean, one could argue that the children do have the right not to use their school accounts while outside of the school if the school is already letting them know that everything is being tracked. But that set aside, I wonder, what do people think that if we get to a point where you do have a permanent record, where absolutely everybody has a fully indexable, searchable history of everything that they've ever done in the past and anything they've ever done in public that's been recorded and everything else, once that transparency of how you've spent your life, would that bring about more equilibrium between people? It would be very hard for you to stand on stage as maybe some sort of religious extremist and spout hatred for certain sectors of society, for instance, and try and galvanize them maybe as like a far right representative. If anybody could look into your past and see all the things that you did, as like, it's hard for you to go on a rant about the dangers of pornography when anybody can go in the past and see how you spent your time online. So would that breed more intolerance if anybody could do that at any time with anyone?
This
Well,
is
Carl,
already actively used on Snowden disclosures with things. They actually added a section in there for monitoring for porn usage for imams and for religious leaders. They actually already have that a part of operational doctrine, apparently. Another component to throw on there is I consider essentially black markets for any sort of thing. When you have money, you can pay for things. Imagine being able to pay for privacy because you have lawyers that have essentially a different level of private lawyer-client attorney privileges. You can basically shove everything through them. That's very expensive to do so, but there's other variations of that. Imagine essentially a sort of data black market for make me look like I'm electable, make me look essentially like I'm respectable, but it costs money to do so. And well, if you don't have the money for that, that's okay. You can get this other sponsor to pay for it, but now you're representing their interests. I think it's not going to basically make it go away as a perfect record.
I think we have to
still one.
understand that these things affect us differently based on who we are. So for women, total transparency means a very high degree of risk for online violence and violence in real life. For people living with HIV, I work a lot with people living with HIV, LGBTIQ people. Not everyone can, afford to have everything in their lives publicly displayed. And so I think we have to understand that, that experience of transparency is very different depending on who you are.
Yeah, but if the path is towards a big brother blockchain where everything is recorded, and that's imposed by governments because it's not only tied to your social security number, but really everything is recorded because it can be traced, it can be found on internet, it can be, so it's in a way, and that I think, Meg, you have a good point here from one part is a human rights perspective. The other is then the human health perspective, because again, something can harm you, and you might not even have it's your fault, but it's stamped here because you got banned somewhere in some app or whatever. or somebody says you have done something and you don't know how to defend this one, again, I think it's an extremely dangerous pathway of the power of governments over you. You can see that in China with the data. Yeah, and then everything is imprinted and it's there forever. Yeah, and you have to deal with it. And I believe that will lead a path where actually more people will have suicides. More people will not, will have a difficulty to live with this, because at the end, even your insurance company, yeah, can say, because based on your behavior, how much you will pay if you sleep enough, if you eat enough, if you're healthy enough, if you behave good,
Exactly.
and that
Yep.
is everything is,
The only
you're
reason
basically
why I
at the end,
suggest it,
yeah, it's just a rabbit hole, which is a pretty
God forbid
awkward
you're a
and awful
dissident says
one.
something that government doesn't agree with.
To be fair, like I actually favor a lot of this tracking, and so I might take the other side of this, which is that I'm of the view that more information leads usually to more empathy, and
exactly.
just as back in the day, and I've written about this on my Substack and elsewhere, given talks about this, but like we used to believe that mothers sort of cause schizophrenia in their children. If you look at, like, say, the way the gay rights struggle has sort of gone on, where it went from being sort of a fringe thing that gays could get married to something that's sort of de rigueur throughout a lot of the world. Not to say that it's perfect, but basically, when you have an immutable characteristic that's expressed in your genes, which ultimately is a makeup of who you are, I think it's very hard to be discriminatory towards people because they can't help who and what they are. And so I do think, like, the insurance markets and a lot of these things will change over time necessarily, as more information is given up. And I don't favor banning the use of these technologies. I think, on the contrary, I think that just accelerates other data plays that other countries might offer. I mean, I don't want to live in a country in which the U.S. is the only country that doesn't have facial recognition or doesn't have nuclear weapons. And with respect, I mean, I think that there's a huge problem in the financial world in which countries like Switzerland, to take one example, or Dubai or other countries become sort of like the centers for money laundering, which leads to all sorts of other problems as well, particularly when it comes to despoiling the natural environment and laundering that into Swiss bank accounts or London property markets. So
yeah,
But
yeah,
Charles,
can I add to that, because
real one
Mike
minute,
speaks.
Florian.
Yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
make it brief. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, this is your perspective from a U.S. perspective. I
Mm-hmm.
see it the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
I see it's easy to have money laundering done in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to open a bank account. It's very easy to create an account. Again, this is more control mechanism with FATCA and everything beyond that. I'm not saying that things have to be cleaner. My question is more on the ethical side. Who is actually making sure that this is used for the sake of humanity and not just for power and money throughout different governments and people and companies around the world?
Okay, so check this out. So in this article, the how articles always have this big breakout quote section, and in this article, the breakout quote section says, it's a quote from Matt Shaver, former Minneapolis public school teacher, and he says, "I'm trying to imagine finding out about this as a high schooler, that every single word I've written in a Google Hangout or whatever is being monitored. We live in a country with laws around unreasonable search and seizure, and surveillance is just really slippery slope." Okay, hold that thought, because governments, as we've mentioned here in Tech News Around the World, are obviously relatively recently figured out the power of data. And to that point, somebody shared a headline recently, and watch how interesting this gets. So, from the Times of Israel, the headline reads, the Prime Minister Bennett says Israel to genetically scan all arrivals in Israel for the coronavirus. Of course, genetically scanning means they're going to take a DNA sample, and of course they'll build a DNA database. And Charles and myself have both been reminding people kind of somewhat regularly that governments are going to do this. I think we can come clean on this and say governments knowing about the power of data and your data in your Google Hangouts is one thing, but your genetic data is another. And there's now multiple reports of countries. And there was a headline even published that I believe was somewhere in the Middle East. I want to say it was the UAE that had a kind of similar to this sort of announced that they had ambitions to collect all of the DNA of everybody arriving at their immigration desks. China, it's reported in the New York Times that China is building a genetic database of everybody. So if governments understand the power of data, and DNA is very powerful data, governments are going to collect the DNA of everybody, whether we know it or not. And by the way, there was another article about in Orange County, how they're collecting data and how the LA Police Department is collecting everybody's social media data. Like, data collection is going to happen. DNA data collection is going to happen in mass. As usual, China's just the first because they're the ones that understood the power of data. But what are we to make of a world where DNA databases are going to exist and insurance companies are going to want access to that? And
they're going to get hacked.
And they will get that too. And so here, watch this next headline. I swear on my father, my mother, my sister, whatever you want. The next story, I don't pick the sequence of these stories. The next story is from the Financial Times. Irish Data Commissioner launches GDPR probe over children's data and China transfers. And the actual headline is Irish Data Commissioner launches GDPR probe into TikTok over its handling of children's data and the transfer of user information to China.
Are they doing the Think of the Children line?
The Irish Data Commissioner... hold on. Ireland's Data Protection Commission, which oversees the enforcement of the EU's GDPR in the country, announced on Tuesday that it would examine the company's TikTok's processing of personal data for under 18-year-olds, including the company's age verification measures for under 13-year-olds. A second inquiry will examine TikTok's alleged transfers of personal data to China. Companies can be fined up to 4% of annual global revenues, or £20 million, for GDPR breaches. TikTok reported annual revenues of $34 billion in 2020, an increase of 111% from the previous year. TikTok is in the process of opening an EU TikTok's in the process of opening their EU headquarters in Dublin.
Okay, so they just negotiating the tax rate at this point, or are they actually going to do anything about stuff? I mean, it's like I could kind of get a feeling with some of these things. It's like they just look at the local tax rate and go, well, we can boost that a little bit, or we could actually enforce the law. Well, we could do both. And does anything actually change? Well, no, but we've regulated, so that fixes it, right?
No. In the case of TikTok, in the case of Ireland, UK agreements, you're going to see a lot more anti-TikTok stuff in the very near future in the West, particularly in a lot of the European countries, and you're going to start seeing it much faster than you would expect. GDPR is basically a vehicle. It's a protectionist weapon, really, under the guise of privacy that the Europeans use. But this is a very deliberate strategy, and you're going to see a lot more of it. In the not too distant future when it comes to these kind of tech plays. One of the things you'll also note, by the way, is there have been all these so-called privacy investigations of things like Clearview, but there are all these investigations, and yet there's never an actual conclusion to those investigations, oftentimes. And the reason for that is that negotiations take place, government to government over the use of these kind of technologies. In the case of TikTok, in the case of the Chinese generally, they are such bad actors. I mean, running around selling people fake vaccines, running around selling them, fake COVID tests, fake PPE. People are starting to really ask the question about what's really going on with the Chinese here.
Well, not just like a Chinese thing. It's just the fact that they aren't coming to the negotiation table. Like recently, there was a headline where the COP is coming up with things so that the climate convention, and along the way, like we send like what we sent like was it Kerry with things for like Ambassador Climate stuff, and he flies away to China, and they're like, we'll do a Zoom session with you. They just met in person with the Taliban kind of thing, but it's like, yeah, we can't be bothered to essentially do that. Biden tries calling for the first thing with stuff, and it's like, I didn't really get anywhere with that. If we're not able to have basically leaders actually even talking at the highest levels, especially in centralized government bodies like that, we're not going to be able to make any kind of like progress on anything lower down with stuff. So I mean, this is the sort of thing where you're going to see ratcheting pressure just to get people to the negotiation table, because right now that's not even happening with stuff, and it's getting kind of dicey. I think there was a headline actually recently where they're calling up saying, "Oh yeah, we aren't planning on invading imminently." That was a thing from another headline. I need to get the thing on that one with stuff, but during to Trump's as he's leaving with things, there was some apparently interesting conversations with some military generals around that time.
Yeah,
He's gonna get a better headline with that.
that's way more complicated than it appears, and probably not good to talk about it on a Chinese app.
So
Hey,
May I
it makes it
just
more
add?
interesting.
Oh, sorry. Just wanted to add on the DNA side, because one thing I myself was not aware of until 2004 was that since 1975, Sweden actually collects a blood sample from every child born for medical research. And we've always had this, regardless of what you think of each government leader, we have a trust in government, which we should have. And we are so used to, as Tyler knows, everything is public. What's privacy? That's been my entire life. But 75, they started with the blood samples, which subsequently led to that they have a huge bank of DNA. So by default, each child born since 75, they have a sample. That in 2004, when our foreign minister was killed, it of course it became highlighted because they found the killer that way, because he was born after 75 through DNA. So
wow.
A
that was
vast
positive.
majority of that data is collected actually in the United States as well, and in other governments as
Yeah.
well. The data has not been sequenced for the blood samples. However, state by state, I think like states like Utah essentially have a large amount of that genetic data. There's others of other groups. And what's interesting about this as a matter of consent is that this is done as an automatic part of essentially of having a kid. It's not really something where it's like, hey, would you like this to be a report to an insurance company at some point in the future? It's just something that just happens. So what's going to be interesting is this is an example of samples being collected at one point and then decades into the future becoming much, much more valuable, like we're entering that right now.
Exactly.
So that
And
data will
that's
become more valuable as time goes on just by existing and just by having part of this
which of
physical
course
samples.
then happened from 75 to 2004. But then of course, since this is connected to each, since forever have a personal security number, social security number, is connected to each child. Obviously, that's how they caught this killer. But then in 2004, when this happened, of course, it became a huge blowout here, because we're supposed to know about these things. We might say yes by default, but how did the population not know that this is happening? So now you can ask for it to be taken away or deleted, basically, or destroyed, as it's a blood sample. But I thought that was very interesting, because it was
Yeah,
something I hadn't been aware of for, what is it, a lot of years.
I would say I think every child born in California now since 1970 has their DNA put onto a little index card, and there are a lot of us who want to actually sequence all of those index cards. And this is something I've talked to the Biden administration about. And I think, look, I mean, I think there's a compelling state interest in having everybody's genetics sequenced on the planet. And I don't just mean, human beings. I mean every, to quote the old, Chinese head of BGI, every living thing of consequence. And I think this is how we really preserve biodiversity. I mean, you could see this with the sort of perhaps quixotic attempts to sequence the mammoth that's taking place. But we are going to need to keep an inventory of everything on the planet as more and more things get extincted by climate change. And so I think that there's a moral case to be made. In the case of, like, I know in Estonia there's a 200,000 person biobank. In the UK, I think it's up to 500,000. And for those of us who are of of Estonian or British heritage, this biobank is actually net beneficial to us. Like, we're free riders off of the genetic research that comes off of this. And I think that for those of us who are of other ethnicities, yes, I mean, I think the United States in particular, I think, has a moral case to be made. I mean, we're now at a stage where it's $100 to do a full genome sequence. And, that's quite, quite amazing. And it's something that we should avail ourselves of. And all right, if the private insurance industry goes out of business or has to be regulated, so be it. Like it's worth knowing these things. And you know, the company Othram that I'm involved in has solved a number of murders and rapes using, you know, and identified a number of missing persons using full genome sequencing. In fact, I think just the other day there was one in Canada that was solved in Yukon, where they couldn't identify who the person was. And this sort of thing is like helping families find closure. It's helping people solve murders and rapes. So I think it's all to the good. And I think the concern about privacy, you know, maybe we should be more empathetic to people who have, you know, differences of ability or genetics. I mean, we changed the culture around talking about people who suffered from, mental difficulties. We're increasingly changing the conversation around mental health issues. Maybe we should just be kinder to one another, and maybe genetics will show us that over time.
Historically, when you make lists of large numbers of people and then there's a large amount of political division, that can cause extremely tempting targets for basically everything from saying, hey, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time,
Exactly.
to these people groups essentially are subhuman and essentially they should be wiped out. And by the way, not just those people, anyone connected to those people. So this is essentially something that's very dangerous to leave lying around, because it's almost like leaving like a loaded gun, essentially, rather than essentially having you have to carefully assemble and put the individual components. The easier we make these data sets available, as new capabilities are discovered and as technology rapidly accelerates, the timeline that it takes to actually consider the implications of any decision is going to shrink to the point where you wake up one day and you find out, oh wait, they have samples in every single person in a certain population group. Oh wait, suddenly essentially that population group is no longer popular because of the reason X, Y, or Z. And then you've got problems like you have over in China, where they're basically literally saying, well, this people group shouldn't exist anymore. And then they're just, methodically going out and sterilizing, millions of people with that. We are basically entering into a world where that is a realistic concern, and it should be taken into account with these threat considerations.
I mean, I think with what Charles was saying, I would agree that if it's used in a positive manner, then yeah, I mean, there's a million different amazing things that you can do by knowing and having that data. But the real issue is that people don't have that trust anymore. Most people don't have the trust on their big brother government. They don't have that trust. So the question that would come up for the average person is, especially if it's something that is mandatory, and if it's just something that's collected no matter what, the main question is going to be, well, why is my data, why is everything that you need to know, what every single conversation I have, every single my genetic makeup, why is it so important for you? How have we come along all this time? And the reality is that it could fall in the wrong hands, it could be misused. It is proven that this happens all the time, and that human error does exist even in the world, and the world of technology and computers. So
I mean, I would say right now there's a moral imperative to sequence everyone if we're going to be doing things like having vaccine mandates, where there are people who are subsets of the population that will be harmed by these vaccine mandates. The one
that
size
I
fits all
absolutely agree with.
approach
That
doesn't
I
work.
abs-
We've
Uh,
had vaccine mandates for a very long time. I don't know how many people on this call right now have polio, but if you don't have polio, there's probably a really good reason for that.
well, actually, vaccines. I mean, for one, the mRNA vaccine is not actually a vaccine. So, like,
It's a
in
suppressant.
so there's that. But in the case of polio, I mean, the polio vaccine has stood the test of time. I believe there was a 15-year longitudinal study, not just a 10-year longitudinal study. So I don't want to go like belabor the point about like current events. I mean, I'm sure we could do things like, in the case of, most recently, we have situations where people are overdiagnosing nursing home people in the United States and saying that they have schizophrenia, so as to drug them, so as to take more money from them when they have things like dementia. And there's sort of all sorts of abuses that take place in our hospitals, in our schools, when we don't really know about our student body. And for what it's worth, I favor every single person on the planet being sequenced, including the dead, by the way, I should add. I think that there's a compelling case to be made for genetically sequencing people who've been deceased, just to deal with questions of paternity, to deal with questions of health. And I think, by the way, this is going to happen whether people here like it or not. In fact, like, these are conversations that are occurring right now by the Biden administration about what to do with all 100,000 plus Afghans who've left Afghanistan, given that there are all sorts of health issues there. And so I think it's the morally correct thing to sequence these people, particularly the ones that have issues with cousin marriage, which will have a taxing effect on our healthcare system in the United States. There are issues that come with tribal societies versus modern societies that we need to sort of figure out how to accommodate. So I don't want to like
Isn't it?
overstate this, but like
Yeah, but
this is
Charles.
happening.
So there's two separate issues. One is taking DNA samples of everyone. The other issue is sequencing the human genome to the degree where we understand and inevitably will start to classify some genes as quote unquote bad genes. Like some people have the gene for, like you say, schizophrenia, or maybe even we get to a point where we understand the propensity to cause murder, or what's the word I'm looking for? Psychopath.
I'm going to interrupt real quick. Are there
Yeah.
any biologists or geneticists in the room? Because I feel like we're going into a territory where some of that expertise would be really useful.
Well, my point is this: is if we do get to a point where we start having quote unquote bad genes, right, where we start to label this is clearly a bad gene, like this is something people don't want. Are we going to then have a right of replication where people are you're going to have to get approval if you we take it for granted that people have the right to reproduce. It's not listed in the Bill of Rights, but like freedom of speech, but you have the right to reproduce. But is that something that the state is then, once the state understands that there are bad genes out there, the state's going to want to mandate? You're going to need a replication passport, so to speak, based on your genetics.
So
This
if
really
I
sounds
can, if I
really,
can just
really
add,
dystopian for real, but there have been quite a few movies and
Well, the
books
Uyghurs would
regarding
say
this
this exists.
scenario.
By the Johan, the Uyghurs would say this exists today in China.
Exactly. Yeah.
Should be aware
if I
that
can
we
just,
have had this selection of who are allowed to reproduce in Sweden, and I kid you not, this didn't end in Sweden until in the middle of the 70s. From the 60s, during the 60s, we circumcised, vad heter det, sterilized both men and women that were from some ethnical groups, and some of them will actually shock you because we actually sterilized Zigeuners in Sweden in the 60s for real. And we also sterilized mentally handicapped men and women. And this was under full government control. And the number will probably shock you because it's over 60,000 that has been sterilized by the Swedish state in the 1900s. Go figure that one
1992 in
out.
Canada
So,
with things, so sterilization of indigenous populations, it's still going on in some capacities.
Well,
yeah, but in
I mean,
Sweden, seriously.
let's take. I mean, to answer Tyler's question, there's sort of no like candidate genes, right? That's sort of like the wrong way of thinking about it. There are these things called polygenic scores, and the way it kind of works is you build up a very large data set of people's genetics, and then you match it to a phenotypic trait, say their height, their intelligence, and then what you do is you give somebody sort of a probabilistic estimate based upon their genetics. So you could imagine it like a bell curve distribution, and you could imagine people being at the top end and the low end of that bell curve. And yeah, I mean, I think what will happen is people will know this when they do things like dating, right? They'll know these things about their future children, which we see with IVF right now, where like there are many women that consider IVF and they have to make a decision, or with their partner or what have you, about which of their fertilized eggs do they bring to term and which ones they keep in the cooler, as it were. And so that those are questions that I think are questions that are going to have like cultural and maybe even legal questions associated with it. I mean, one could imagine a scenario in which somebody was selecting for sociopathic traits or psychopathic traits rather than against them, right? So I think we're going to have to sort of figure out what is sort of acceptable or not acceptable when it comes to genetic selection here. And this world is very much at hand. I mean, there are children walking among us today who have been selected, through basically polygenic scores to eliminate things like diabetes or like high levels of heart disease, through IVF. Now, I don't think you can have reproductive rights in a serious sense without also allowing this kind of this kind of enhanced choice that goes on. If you look at, there are a whole bunch of countries where lots of women don't give birth to Down syndrome kids relative to their population as a whole. Now, I think that that should be a choice that's left up to a woman and and to her family, and making those decisions secondarily. But obviously, other societies are going to have to figure out their own adjustment with these questions. And to some extent, we have eugenic policies already. I mean, there are not that many people who are homeless guys having lots of children, right? And in the case of the West, you see this with people not able to afford having children in major cities, right? Having to leave the city to have children, and that's sort of something that we're seeing across the world, these sort of questions. So I think the idea of just sort of like dodging the thing, or sort of making like, oh, because we have a census or because we have driver's licenses, will necessarily be like Hitlery, I think is kind of silly. Now, in the case of China, that's a sort of special case, right? Because the Chinese state has decided that they're going to be a rogue actor, and we unfortunately are complicit. Everyone who's on an iPhone right now or who buys things from China is complicit in basically, that relationship. And we should be pressuring our governments. Our governments should be looking for other supply lines. I mean, we should isolate, this rogue regime. We should not participate in the genocide Olympics that are coming up. Like, there are lots of ways in which we can make our discontent known over these policies that other countries are pursuing, that we do right now. I mean, just today, there's more stuff coming out about UAE, hiring Americans to hack. There are other examples of like Pegasus, and Israel, misbehaving, and that led to the sort of essentially led to the fall of the Netanyahu government. So I think there are lots of ways in which we as an international community can set standards here that are acceptable or not acceptable.
Let me
Charles, if
hold
I can
on,
just
hold on. Let me.
include.
Oh, excuse me. Let me jump in here. So,
Wait. Let Netta go first, and then you go, LS.
Thank you, Charles. As I'm sure you know this better than me, actually, obviously. But some of the reasons that we were talking about, as an example, there was a genome project. I believe it was in UC Davis, if I'm not mistaken. And for instance, that there were scientists, which Iranian scientists were also included. I think they were heading the project. They were able to get funded for the purpose of protecting and to understand, the genetics of the race. Let's say for the Iranians, the Persian DNA, the heritage, and they were trying to find out for the purpose of let's gather as much as we can so that we know exactly what kind of diseases and what kind of illnesses they're more likely to get, and they're more susceptible to, so that in order we can create some kind of a way to to predict it and to prevent it. The downside of that was that, of course, a lot of people started freaking out and saying that, well, where's this funding coming from and why? Because by knowing that, by knowing the, what their susceptibilities are, you can also then create something to counter them. You can also create something to make them more sick. Hence walks in this the virus, which people started freaking out about, and it was all over in the conversations and saying that, well, why are the Iranians, why are the Persian heritage getting hit or dying so much more and closer at that point when it was first starting out? The same thing with Italy, and saying that we're genetically close with the Italians. Why are the Italians and why are the Iranians getting hit as hard as they are, as bad as they are, in comparison? Which led into a lot of different conversations, and the safety of the data of gathering this DNA and how we could be used, against the people if it's in the wrong hands. And now, as a result of it, now you've got people inside the country in Iran not trusting any of the vaccines that's coming out and saying that we're going to do something, we'll make it and we'll create it for ourselves because we don't know what the intentions are. So, I mean, there's so many different layers to it.
For sure. And
Interesting
race
point.
specific bioweapons are being built all around the world right now, and the countermeasures to them are being built as well. That's a real thing that's happening, and people should know about it.
I
Okay,
think each country is responsible for doing that for themselves,
LS.
play it safe.
yeah, I don't want to belabor the point. I was just going to jump in with Charles on one point, and I think Nadia kind of covered it. But it's intriguing because Lakeisha said something earlier, and I think with tech, I don't want to be too belabored on this, but I was speaking to Stephen Ibarki recently, who is the founding member of the AI for Good Global Summit for the United Nations and also on the World Health Organization Global Artificial Intelligence for Global Health. And so we were talking about what happens with tech when it goes good or bad. And it's sad. I mean, I agree with Lakeisha, like, and Nadia, when this can be turned, how can we help, minorities not do the propensity of diseases, which is what Charles is saying. How do you, do this in a lab and predict the DNA and the human genome? And DeepMind just did this protein fold, which leads into something else. So we can learn from that and prevent these diseases. But if it's in the wrong hands, which it will always have the plausibility of being, then it could be used against it. So I think, the sword always slices both ways, and it's intriguing, but I don't think we keep a genie in a bottle for tech out of fear. I guess that's my main point, because the world's going to go there anyway. And I mean, if we really thought this way, we would have peace on earth. And Tyler, actually, I mentioned you in the interview. I told Cheryl and Lakeisha about that. They know. Cheryl and Lakeisha could back channel you, but I talked about you in the inner city. Like, it won't change. It'll just be the same shit. Excuse my language. And sometimes I get tired of it. It's repeating because I'm too old for this. It's just the same circle going over. Like, why do we not have peace on earth? And why? I mean, I understand bad actors. I get all that. I was in the Marine Corps, all that. I get it. But it's like we're iterating so advanced. We're going to metaverses, quantum machine learning. We're doing this. Those of us who are doing it, and so we see what's coming. But then the world's like still back in the dark ages at times, arguing over, do you get vaccinated or not? And, I mean, it's just weird. So sometimes I just think, we keep going forward and we keep checking ourselves as humanity. But we use these technologies to help, where my heart is, the indigenous and African American and minorities throughout the world, because my son's from Ethiopia, Africa, and all of these other countries that have just been suffering because they don't know their DNA perplexities. They don't even know, they don't know what will kill them in 10 years. So they just keep eating chicken, fried chicken and whatever, not exercising, not knowing, and I'm not blaming anyone or criticizing anyone, not knowing that they might have a DNA propensity against that's going to kill them. So, figure it out. And if they can be helped with that, that's good. And yes, some insurance company and all these will take advantage of it, but we can dial it back.
I'm imagining in the same way that lately there's the, well, as a white man or as a Jewish, woman or as a this or that, what happens when we sequence our genomes and we're like, well, as someone with gene number 5327 that does,
The identity politics on the extreme.
Yeah.
No, we do this. We do this already in the genetics.
Wait, finish the
community.
point though. Finish your point, Tyler.
I'm
sorry.
just saying, like, is that not inevitable? Because I'm somebody who's genetically predisposed, has a disposition towards feeling a certain way, or it creates.
Well, and I want to believe, and I'm not just naive.
Well, just check this out. We currently not all of us. I try and actively go against this, but people, there's a tendency for people to segment based on different characteristics, be it age or as an older white bald male or whatever. Like what people segment based on different characteristics, based on the ones that we can observe. But there's a whole lot of other characteristics genetically that we don't observe, and that we
Speaking
will
as a recognized sociopath.
Right. So yes, as somebody with the sociopath gene or whatever, my point is we're going to be able to segment in 1,000 different ways that we don't currently do today when we understand genetic sequencing.
I can hear the pollsters licking their lips already.
So who's going to be the first one to start the
538 of the future?
But I'm just gonna push back. Sorry to be different, and me, Tyler. I'm just always gonna say what I say. But me and you know, we both know the age parameter of myself and you. So when YouTube first came online, there was more racism going on in the world about people and black friends and all of this other stuff and racism around the world. My son, which you know about, but
yeah.
He started connecting with people on YouTube. And I swear I've heard stories, and I can live in a bubble, but I don't, that more people connected by seeing other young kids around the world saying that person's just like me. So what we don't hear in the media, and you're good to bring that to the light, We don't hear about all the positive damn stories that are going on. That, oh yeah, I connected with a kid in Pakistan, and he's like me, and we think the same way. And this is what, even with Facebook, all of this negativism, that they get is the good, because when you can connect, they can see reality. So I'm always looking at the world in a macro balanced way, where Twitter and all of these things have helped take out these negative regimes, brought highlight to news that wasn't covered because it wasn't politically savvy. And, we're always like the underground. You don't know the truth. And I really believe humanity will get there. We just got to always, let me be clear, we got to always keep this shit as a check and balance as humanity. So we've got to always check power.
Okay.
We got to check ourselves.
Well,
and that's it.
So Tyler, just a quick one on
okay,
that.
last thought here. Go ahead, Dave.
That was a really nice, good discussion around genes, sequencing, DNA. Like we heard the arguments for, we heard the arguments against. Like, could we do a little poll to try and conclude it, or is it a bit?
What
do you want to move on?
What in your mind is the right poll question?
Do we think that gene and DNA sequencing could be a more of a force for good than bad if curated in the right way? Something like that.
I think,
or the inverse. Either way, I'm just trying to get a sense.
Or are people optimistic or pessimistic about the future of genetics? It's both simultaneously. It's going to be wildly, unimaginably positive and negative. I think that we can't even yet fully grasp how tremendously positive things can get as a result of all the genetic revolution that's about to occur, and the causes for optimism and pessimism, or the dystopian and the non-dystopian scenarios, are going to be tremendous.
By the way, the polling evidence on this is when people discover that they have family members, right, that they didn't know they had, like illegitimate children, cousins, whatever.
Okay, Charles.
The polling on this, just to be clear on this, the polling on this is that they ask them, like, hey, now that you've met your illegitimate kid, or your dad you didn't know you had, whatever, right? The polling is that would you rather have not known? Like, do you have regrets about learning this? And something like fewer than 5% of people who are interviewed, describe having a bad experience. In fact, if you just go and you look, you Google sometime, reunited through genetics or 23andMe or Ancestry,
okay,
like that's a real thing that's happening, and people's lives are upended.
So check this out.
I'm optimistic.
So yeah, Cheryl's optimistic. So the next one is, and again, I don't make the order here. The next one's from Financial Times, and it's only a couple hours old, about Amazon's plans to expand into healthcare as it prepares to launch services such as telehealth and technology for managing healthcare records. And Amazon loves data, perhaps more than any company ever. And Amazon's getting super, super interested in health, and that's what this Financial Times article is about. The e-commerce company is developing services for consumers and hospitals, but faces competition from Google, Microsoft, and Walmart. Millions. And then the point is, we're going on about genetics. Knowing Amazon's tendencies, we have to assume that, this whole genetic data health, and as it says, Google and Microsoft and Amazon all going into health. Google's already got a head start on the genetics thing. Like, Sergey's partner is the co-founder of 23andMe. And if you think that's a coincidence, you're an idiot. So here comes big data with big health and a whole lot of, if you don't think that they're going to be jumping headfirst into DNA, you're not following the trends. So what to think of the
Tyler, I think priests should be getting ready for a whole load of visits of Bless Me Father, for I have sinned.
There's going to be a whole
following way
next to the big tech headquarters. Yes,
I think that we should be getting ready for putting genes on blockchain.
Oh, that's a whole other dimension. Yeah. Good to see you back, Shira. So the headline from Financial Times says, over the past year, a tie-up between the network of 8 hospitals and its cloud computing arm, Amazon Web Services, has led to voice activation being built into experimental operating theater powered by much of the same technology found in the Alexa assistant. The commands start running through vital steps of the operation, allowing the surgeon to verbally confirm when he or she has taken certain actions, such as administering anesthesia. Oh, that's interesting. So Alexa can tell you, okay, step 1 is this, step 2 is this, step 3 is this, step 4 is this. That could be used in an incredible amount of use cases, not just in medicine for a
That's
surgeon.
huge.
Yeah.
There's some work being done with HoloLens things for Magic Leap actually experimented with this too with XR, essentially like step by step instructions. It's one of the few market segments that actually has like strong revenues with it in corporate training environments and skills transfer. There's a group called PT, and I think it's actually PTR. I need to look it up again with things, but they do essentially the Vuforia tracking targets. And essentially, it's one of the few augmented reality companies that actually makes money. There's a lot of hype in the industry. There's an enormous amount of amazing technology. What there hasn't been is a lot of revenue. One of the things that's really interesting about this is that as you start tracking
Ben, you have a hot mic, Ben.
those skills transfers become really huge, step by step. Being able to document that knowledge, especially as workers retiring, or as essentially as you're starting to onboard, essentially with labor shortages, or being able to amplify the ability for workers to basically rapidly come up to speed and reduce training time. It's a very straightforward calculation to run on whether or not it's worth the technology investment, and many companies that run that calculation are willing to spend on it. So it's that's a more exciting sector. If people want to jump into XR, look at anything XR related to training or skills transfer or things related to the step-by-step instructions, because voice commands and the voice integration, that's one of those huge components that allows you to do the hands-free, which is
okay.
There's some exciting stuff over there.
Irvin, I invited you up, and I don't see you on stage, so you might need to bounce out and back in. But the headline says here, the system represents one slice of Amazon's plans to become just as ubiquitous in healthcare as it is in other markets. Well, that's wildly ubiquitous. That's producing the tools and platforms to underpin an industry on the cusp of dramatic modernization. The company's in the process of unveiling a flurry of consumer-facing healthcare services such as online pharmacy and telehealth. At the same time, it is steadily developing its capabilities with AWS, an effort to create a new operating system for care that ranges from managing health records to applying AI to predict when a person may become ill.
And diagnostics, point of care. Tune in on Friday as we continue the story. First we're going to paint a description of how the healthcare system works, how the payers in America really are the boss, and how the giants like Amazon, Walmart, and Disney have tried to tackle problems that they face. But Amazon is gearing up. I mean, you have an Alexa now that can identify who's in the room, can do the ECGs and the EEGs remotely, is listening to you to hear sleep apnea. Like Tyler says, can listen to how many times you're flushing in the middle of the night. They're going to start buying, all of your local providers, and all of your local providers are going to want to work for Amazon sooner than later. And this is how it's going to roll out. So, I would say by 2023, Amazon's going to be in full force.
Chris, is this the Friday episode in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be just a primer about, it's not really going to focus on Amazon. We'll probably do a more focused one on what we think Amazon's going to do, but it's going to really describe, right? Like, for example, Amazon as an employer, it doesn't have the same challenges as a Walmart, maybe similar to Walmart, but not the same challenges as, say, a Disney, where Disney's got regional concentration of employees. So, if you're regionally centered, you can set up hospitals, find the best providers regionally. If you're someone like Amazon, you really have to cast a wide net. You're like every 20 miles in America, right? So you got to find providers everywhere. And like how they beta tested is they beta tested on their own employees, and they can see very well which employers are healthier and which aren't, and they pick the winners, and so they do all this A/B testing on the healthcare system. So Walmart, for example, doesn't matter if you're a rank and file or if you're an executive. If you have a heart condition, you're going to Mayo Clinic, or you're going to the Cleveland Clinic, the the best centers of excellence. That's where they're treating their employees, because they know they're going to get results. It's going to
Well,
cost them
they
less in the
do
long run.
until Amazon buys the Mayo Clinic, and then
Exactly.
Amazon's like, "We'll take that, thank you very much." Because looking at this article from Financial Times, it makes the argument like Amazon, just reading it and connecting the dots, Amazon's likely to take over healthcare. They call it Amazon Care. It says, in July this year, Amazon launched Amazon DX, a service that offers at-home testing for COVID-19, where people order a kit off Amazon.com and send it back for testing and results within 24 hours. It's likely just a beginning. Job advertisements points to future ambitions to roll out a number of different tests. One posting recently sought a person with the skills and savvy to chart ambitious or new territory with local, state, and national regulators for clinical diagnostics.
Like they're thinking they're going to do like actual like go back to the 50s where you had house calls again.
That too.
Doctors are just
Yeah, if
gonna be
need
working
be.
for Amazon,
Right.
And nurses that come and do blood draws, and people that are, oh, here's your package, and by the way, I'm gonna take your blood.
Or more than that, Chris, and we'll be short with this. You can just take your own blood, drop it off at an
That's
Amazon
exactly.
locker, and they'll pick it up and take it to the lab.
So I know 4 or 5 years ago when I was in Ohio, we did some work with Cleveland Clinic, and they even then were investing big in big data. So it would really be interesting to know what Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic are doing in this space. Actually, a friend of Cal's and mine, Rita Khan, is the chief technology officer for Mayo. So I'm going to see if I can get her into one of the
And if
U.S.
Faraz
sessions.
can get in here too, because his partner is responsible for. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step over you, Lakeisha.
No, that's quite all right. I just didn't know if my audio had gone out.
Sorry.
But yeah, it would really be interesting to know what's happening from the healthcare side, as they are embracing technology, because I know that they've been at it for several years, if not many more now, and how they are positioning themselves with Amazon and with Walmart and Best Buy and others entering into their space.
It says Amazon has multiple companies have signed up to use Amazon Care, and the company has reportedly been in talks with major issuers, according to a Business Insider report in July, in an effort to become a benefit for tens of millions of more patients. Amazon said it would not comment on speculation about its plans. We have to approach this with a sense of humility, says Amazon's executive. Meaning they want to take over.
Amazon humility? Wait, what?
That humility will be required whenever, like, because the whole AI taking over jobs. This is the clearest route to like radiographers, all of that, the dispensing, the kind of more routine part of health.
Yep.
So I think like this is going to be the big the way that it's going to be done. Amazon putting out trials with, say, this Mayo place, seeing that it works, and then like wholesale adoption. And then like that's part of the jobs, like what would you call it, AI of jobs or whatever they're calling it.
Yeah, it says Amazon will make the industry nervous. It says Ariel Trzynski, a principal analyst at Forrester. They have the flexibility to meet the consumer wherever they are with whatever they need. And the industry has spent at least 20 years telling us they're going to make healthcare less confusing, less complex, less costly. That hasn't happened because Amazon doesn't own hospitals. Because they don't have an existing structure, they can approach this de novo, which is that they can say we can do whatever's best for you, and there's plenty of money in the healthcare to make the profit. The article makes a point. Like Amazon can just deliver your meds to you through Amazon, and they can reinvent healthcare from the bottom up.
They already own PillPack.
They own everything.
But my point,
it's like the retailers, Tyler, right? It's like the retailers with the huge store footprint that are out there just costing loads. I think hospitals are the equivalent.
Yes, they will do to the medical industry what they've done to retail, which is just completely reinvent it, optimize it based on data, based on logistics, but because it's based on data, you have to imagine you can't not think about DNA when you think about data in medicine, in the
You'll
types of
notice I'm being very quiet here, Tyler.
yeah.
But
That's
Tyler,
all I
you've
have to say
already
about
touched
that.
upon this in the past when you were talking about retail customers and small businesses. We're heading there, good or bad, to platform as a service with the logistics to surround it. And that's what Amazon can do. Because if they're a platform, they're not, beholden to a certain state or locality or district or local city or government. They can just move globally and then deliver that. And you've talked about this with Kyle for, like about
Mm-hmm.
5 months ago,
Yeah.
of how what was it, Spotify and these companies would just Shopify and similar to small businesses, how it would just be locally logistics and they'll just deliver it.
Mm-hmm. So there's a bunch of fundraising announcements as usual. Who's interesting here? TIA, a provider of virtual and in-person health and wellness services for women, raises $100 million. And supply chain and logistics cloud software startup Stored raises $90 million. Comcast partners with TV manufacturer Hisense to sell 2 smart TVs under the brand X Class. Sydney-based Immutable, which develops Ethereum-based tools to monetize NFTs in games, raises $60 million. And Seattle-based Skykick, which builds software to help SMBs with their cloud infrastructure management, raises $130 million. And that's kind of a former AI research scientist at Google details how tech companies and the U.S. government hide their surveillance projects in plain sight. Oh, that's clickbait. I'm onto that one. Let's read that one. Nobody has sent that one in that I'm aware of. Learning about the Pentagon's drone program through FOIA requests and public filings. It says, when I left Stanford to join Google as an AI research scientist, I went across the street. Well, because they're next door to each other, yeah. As the saying went. I had been a young assistant professor, first at Georgia Tech and then Stanford, doing research that was particularly funded by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. At one point, I brought up the ethical issues of researching surveillance technologies with the DARPA program manager, but frankly, raising ethical concerns in such a competitive environment felt a bit like labeling myself a troublemaker. I was ready to move away from defense work, getting recognized for software development, and yes, make enough money to move out of my small spider-infested apartment on Alma that shook every time the Caltrain went by.
What's this guy's name?
What's the name here? Jack Paulson. And it's humorous to people who've lived in the Bay Area and have ridden Caltran and know where Alma is, and it's kind of a very funny narrative he's painting here. Since then, I learned that digging deeply into public records combined with a modicum of data science can lead to greater accountability and transparency. So that's where a lot of this stuff is hiding in plain sight, as the headline says. But a really interesting article. So I'm going to tweet that out. And now we're going to get into all the other tweets that everyone else is tweeting out. Like this one from John Capp in the audience from Reuters, that China develops machines to track data sent abroad by cars.
Ooh.
From Reuters.
Is this like an IP router thing where they say, hey, if it's going to this place, we want to have a copy?
It says China, the world's biggest vehicle market, where regulators are implementing new rules on data protection, is developing machines that will be able to track data sent abroad by cars, a government-backed agency said on Tuesday. Cars are being fitted with an ever-increasing array of sensors and cameras to assist drivers, but the data such equipment generates can also be used by manufacturers to develop new technologies, such as autonomous driving systems, raising privacy and security concerns, particularly when the information is sent abroad. Automakers in China are required to store data generated by vehicles locally and need to get regulatory approval when they need to export critical data abroad. The U.S. car maker Tesla is under scrutiny in China over its storage and handling of customer data. Beijing has been increasingly concerned over the mountains of data amassed by private firms and whether such information could be attacked or misused especially by foreign states. It recently implemented a new data security law and is tightening up oversight in related areas. Reuters reported that staff at some Chinese government offices were told not to park their Tesla cars near government compounds due to security concerns over vehicle cameras, according to two people with knowledge of the matter. China Automotive Engineering Research Institute said in a statement it has developed a system to analyze the path of data transmission by using a communication detection device to monitor uploaded data and data gathered from vehicles in a testing environment.
Okay, turnabout's fair play. There's a fun little thing here. Remember Pokemon Go? It's the hot craze all around the world. And then all of a sudden they're saying, wait, wow, the kids are basically finding out things in churches and public parks and military bases. Why are there's a bunch of people walking around like zombies outside the military base with their cameras basically pointed at everything here? They're like, oh, it's the hottest new craze. Don't worry, it's happening to a few hundred million people worldwide. And they're like, okay, what's the company? It's like, oh, it's some former guys essentially used to work at this little group called Keyhole with things. It's like, wait, isn't that a spinoff of like some InQtel stuff? And they're like, oh crap, this is all basically ex-NSA people. And so they started saying, well, is it a game? Is it a government psyops operation? And it was amazing watching how fast some overseas government groups started to freak him out. So now we've got the turnabout fair play version of, hey, guess what? Your kids are playing TikTok and dancing essentially the latest moves. Oh, and by the way, the cards are now basically going back and forth. It's fascinating watching what happens when you have government groups suddenly say that super popular thing is now it's having extra functionality uploaded into it.
But most importantly as well, that if they can attach this to Chinese cars or foreign cars within the Chinese borders, they can attach it to Chinese cars that they're exporting.
Hey, they're doing DJI drones, so I mean, this is turnabout's fair play, man.
That's the point I want to bring out also. They're selling very, very cheap autonomous EV China-made cars to all around the world right now.
$4,000 fully EV cars.
Wow, nice.
So the next,
nothing comes cheap. Nothing comes free.
Well, the drones are even much cheaper. The DJI drones are just a few $100. So the next one is from PT Yoder. Just tweeted it out, and it's from Market Watch. It says UC San Diego student, my alma mater, allegedly tapped into phones to steal crypto and tried to blackmail one victim with naked photos. Richard Yuan Lee, 21-year-old, took over at least 40 people's cell phones from his dorm room, prosecutors say. The 21-year-old student at UC San Diego allegedly commandeered the cell phones accounts of at least 40 people to plunder their cryptocurrency wallets. Richard Yuan Lee of Hercules, California, is accused of operating what is called a SIM swap scam from his dorm room at Argo Hall. A SIM card is the chip inside the phone that connects the phone with the number in the account. They say Lee conspired with a cell phone company employee to have unsuspecting victims' SIMs and cell phone accounts transferred to one contained in a stolen iPhone he possessed.
Careful, this is that multi-factor authentication. If you have your bank accounts, etc., linked to your phone so that you get a code. And we talked about this before, Tyler. There's all these services for SMS for businesses. You sign up for it, it costs like $15, and you just have to sign an affidavit that you own the account, and all of a sudden your account's owned. So I say this with dead seriousness, audience. Your Clubhouse account is only protected by your phone number and a 6-digit code.
The Lee had gained access to the victims' accounts, prosecutors say, and other unnamed conspirators would use the phone's two-factor authentication credentials to reset passwords and gain access to the victims' email, bank accounts, and cryptocurrency wallets. In at least one case, prosecutors say Lee stole a significant amount of New Orleans doctors' cryptocurrency and then tried to blackmail him into handing over an additional $640,000 worth of Bitcoin by threatening to share nude photos taken from the doctor's email with people he knew. Federal prosecutors in Louisiana say that in total, Lee activated at least 40 numbers on his iPhone. Lee's lawyer, Bruce Ashley, said his client was a bright and very earnest young man who had a good academic records, but declined to comment on the allegations against him. Well, that's singing the bright side. Yeah.
Got 50 decline of comments now?
Yeah, Lee was initially charged in the scam, but back in 2020, but the case was recently expanded as prosecutors determined that he had allegedly scammed far more victims than initially thought. In February, prosecutors charged cell phone company employee Stephen Daniel DeFiore, 36, of Brandon, Florida, for allegedly transferring control of victim accounts to Lee in exchange for $500 a day. The cell phone company wasn't identified. Next one up, thank you for that one, PT Yoder, is from Todd McLeese, and this is awesome. That GPT-4 will have 100 trillion parameters, 500x the size of GPT-3. Wow. Holy smokies. GPT-3, as most geeks know, is OpenAI's super impressive language generator that where you can ask GPT-3. It does all kinds of genius things, but essentially you can say, hey, GPT-3, tell me a children's story about, purple reindeer, and the origins of Santa Claus. And it will create a very convincing story that sounds smarter than most people you'll engage with on Facebook. And GPT-3 is already super impressive. It already fools people into thinking it's human. And now the headline is that GPT-4 is now being trained on 500x the size of data of GPT-3, which means it will almost certainly be past the Turing test and be smarter than the majority of people you know. Yeah.
It's not 500 times the data. It's 500. It internally has 500 times the number of parameters.
Parameters,
so
yes.
It can make deeper insights into things. So that's going to be pretty fascinating. I think GPT-3 already gobbled up most of the freely available text data on the internet.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. I was like, there isn't a whole lot more data to get. Yeah.
Well, it was text. I mean, you can. I mean, the biggest fire hose of data I can think of would be YouTube, of course, and Google. I'm sure are training stuff on that.
Sure.
But yeah.
Well, until they can figure out how to harness all of the boom of social audio rooms that are likely to happen. The next one from Ngini in the audience found a tweet by Peter Zehan, who I'm endlessly affectionate of, and Peter Zehan. So it's a retweet of Peter Zehan, and Peter says on his Twitter account a few hours ago, Evergrande's collapse has begun. He's talking about one of China's biggest companies and certainly their biggest real estate property developer. And the firm just entered technical default. Point of comparison. By itself, Evergrande is likely to default on more debt in value than the entirety of all assets that imploded during the entirety of the U.S. subprime crisis. And so Barron's has an article, China's plan for troubled developer Evergrande, a controlled detonation. An apt metaphor because it's a property developer. $300 billion in outstanding debt that they have to figure out how to do in a controlled detonation implosion of debt. $300 billion. Rather considerable. So he says, for another point of reference, Chinese GDP has expanded by roughly a factor of 5 since 2020. But debt is up by a factor of 30. Evergrande is...
I'm sorry, Tyler, does the article mention any U.S. banks tied to that debt?
No. I'll tweet it. I just tweeted it out right now, so you can read the Barron's article and see if it does. It says, so the Chinese GDP is up 5x since in the past 20 years, but the debt is up 30x. And Evergrande is a corporate manifestation of that debt explosion. And Peter, who've been following this very closely for many, many years, he's written 3 books on the subject, which are all wildly popular. He's been predicting that China itself will not exist in 10 years. And now he's saying, he's been saying in his books, he's been predicting this for over a decade. He says, here it comes. Everything I've been writing these books about, I've been predicting in multiple best-selling books for over a decade, and here it comes.
Yeah, it's the mob. The mob is now finally being called out in China. That's what this is.
Peter's been on the record as he's a very high paid public speaker, and he speaks very regularly at many events. And he has said there are countless reasons why China will not exist in 10 years. He says, I can give you 20 reasons why China will not exist in 10 years.
It's the elephant that's been tied up with a tiny rope that's about to just destroy that rope, man.
Can we define the sentence "will not exist"?
It will economically collapse. Like Venezuela, like Lebanon. So the next one is from Sarah on stage here. More from Sweden. Did we cover this yet? And essentially, I think, Sarah, what you wanted to cover was that Techstars, the incubator accelerator program based out of Boulder by David Cohen and Brad Feld, is opening in Paris and in Stockholm. Yeah,
Exactly.
2 new accelerator programs in Paris and Stockholm for Techstars. So I will retweet that out for those who want to read all about that, especially people from Paris or Stockholm. And then Cami sends in one that Stanford releases new benchmarks for embodied AI, reproducing real-world challenges encountered by robots and other agents. From Psychology Today. Cami, you want to comment on that one? I imagine it's the...
It's pretty late. I think she said she's on the Pacific time zone, so 20.
So it says AI is speeding innovation in both physical and simulation models for robotics and embodied cognition. A new study by Stanford University researchers introduces Behavior, a benchmark for embodied AI that contains 100 everyday household activities in virtual, interactive, and ecological environments. Stanford University study. Authors include a whole bunch of AI award winners. This one's better off tweeted out. So I just tweeted that one out. It gets very deep very quickly. The next one's from Alexandra.
Yeah. Oh, before you move on, sorry.
Go ahead, Cami.
I was away from my microphone.
Sure.
What's really interesting about this is for me, it is the first time that I've seen a comprehensive set of benchmarks on that pretty much are made on 100 really common type of activities that you'd find in the household. So this is really relevant in that it's really moving us along in terms of accelerating robotics and virtual assistants as well. So Stanford's really leading the way in many areas of artificial intelligence, and embodied AI. Having this is just one set of one step forward in raising the standard, if not setting the standard. So this is really helpful for anyone who's into automation.
Cool. Thank you for that. I just sent it to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW. I retweeted Cami's tweet. And now I'm retweeting Alexandra's tweet from The Verge about a comprehensive breakdown of the Epik versus Apple ruling. Apple's not a monopolist, but it still stifled competition, essentially. And then that's one of the big stories of the year, really. The next one's from BB from Nikkei Japan, that the tech industry braces for skyrocketing rare earth prices, surging demand, and U.S.-China tensions make life tough for hardware makers. And the next one's from Renjin from TechCrunch, that Twitter reopens its account verification process after another pause. Twitter has again restarted its account verification process, the company said on Monday evening. And indeed, they need to really get that shit figured out. As I mentioned to the Twitter founders when they were only 20 people over lunch, so when they were working to recruit me inside, and I thought, man, you're going to need to verify everybody, or this is going to turn into a shit show. And boy, I had no idea how right I was about that one. But
the interesting thing now isn't that the news isn't when Twitter turns on and turns off verification. It's when the news media outlets are going to stop reporting that Twitter, when they get bored of reporting that they've switched it on or off, because it's happening so often now.
Yeah. Well, people get really frustrated. A lot of people want to be verified, but I pray to God they can verify every actual human in this. If we could do identity verification for Twitter, that would solve a whole lot of problems. And just social media in general, I'm hugely in favor of at least the platforms having recourse into knowing, and everyone knowing that everyone is known on the platform. So you couldn't have, a lot. It would remove a lot of bad behaviors, I think. So,
but remember recently there's a fake news from Litecoin.
Yes.
Litecoin is a verified account, but Litecoin actually tweeted on its own Twitter account about the fraud.
Yeah.
That's not good behavior.
Right. Well, if they had identity verification on it was called Global Newswire, which was a platform where it's similar to Twitter. It's a platform where you can do press releases, and somebody made a fake account. And if they had identity verification, that never would have happened.
I still think Twitter is going to become the super app that we keep referring to. They keep paving and making inroads towards that. And if they nail the identity, if they manage the the DeFi, and then somehow crack a way to protect you from content you may or may not want to see, like they're all working on, I think they're going to be that super app.
For anybody that's interested, they have a really good Discord group that I'm part of, and chatting with the developers that are working on the Blue Sky thing. If you can remember when it came out a month and a half, 2 months ago, something like that, where the Twitter was working on a decentralized sort of social media chain. That's an open Discord, so you could just look for Blue Sky Community. It's a little bit tech heavy, but if you're into that at all, it's really, really good. I mean, my question to you, Tyler, would be, would you personally be comfortable if Twitter became the de facto identity verification service? I mean, it kind of, sort of is right now, but I mean, if they expanded it further and it just became the automatic verification sort of thing for anybody.
No, I would want an independent third party. Stripe I would be fine with. Twitter I wouldn't. I wouldn't want it. Whoever becomes that service, I wouldn't want it tied to another business, so to speak, like an ad network.
I have another take on that. I would actually prefer to see the World Bank or something, that a really global entity handling that one.
So,
authority.
Well, Florin, that's interesting because you say one thing. Twitter could do that with Square, though, for finance. So you talk about fintech and verification in Twitter. Wow, that's deep, because that can make a lot of sense.
Nope. There's left pocket to right pocket. Not reliable.
But that's what I've been talking about, and that, they're gonna bring Trump back onto Twitter, and there's gonna be like this battle over his voice, right? And Tyler says it's the not freedom of speech, but freedom of reach, right? Or right to reach. And you're going to pay for reach, and you're going to pay to deny reach. And that's going to be the other mechanism. It's going to be like the upvote, downvote system on Reddit.
So next,
or like Dig.
Yeah. Next article here. U.S. fines former the U.S. Department of Justice has fined 3 former NSA employees who worked as hackers for hire for the United Arab Emirates cybersecurity company. Mark Bayer, Ryan Adams, and Daniel Garrick broke U.S. export control laws that require companies and individuals to obtain a special license from the State Department's Directorate of Defense Trade Controls before providing defense-related services to a foreign government. According to court documents, the 3 suspects helped the United Arab Emirates company develop and successfully deploy at least 2 hacking tools. The 3 entered into a first-of-its-kind deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice today, agreeing to pay $750,000, $600,000, and $335,000 respectively over a 3-year term in order to avoid jail time for their actions. The 3 worked for Dark Matter's Project Raven. Oh, shit. while the court documents are heavily redacted, their actions being first exposed by a whistleblower and documented in multi-part Reuters investigation in 2019. Per the Reuters report, the three worked as contractors for the UAE-based Dark Matter between 2016 and 2019. I got to pause for 1 second. Okay, sorry. The DOJ targets hackers for, wild. So it says the Department of Justice targets hacker for hire scene. Besides today's fines, the DOJ agreement also includes the following. So I'm just tweeting that one out now for those who want to read that one. And then the next one is a very good news for Stockholm and my friends Alan and Nami from Truecaller. Swedish caller identification service Truecaller seeks to raise over $100 million in an IPO. Truecaller, which operates as an eponymous caller identification service, said on Wednesday it's looking to raise $116 million in an IPO on NASDAQ. The 12-year-old Stockholm firm aiming for a valuation of $3 billion in the IPO. And I could not be happier for Alan.
What do they do?
They focused on India, and it's basically when you install Truecaller, it's the world's largest database of everybody's cell phone numbers, essentially. And how they've productized that is when somebody calls you, you know who's calling you because it's everybody opts into allowing access to their contacts. So they have everybody's contacts. So they know everybody's cell phone number. So if an unknown number calls you, you already know who it'll be, even though you shouldn't, essentially.
Right, yeah. It's baked into the UK sort of landline systems, like caller ID, you can opt out or opt in.
So the main way they productize it is in India, spam phone calls is a huge problem in India. And so this stops them from happening. So once you install Truecaller, you stop getting, countless spam phone calls, which is as I mentioned, it's hard to emphasize how big of a problem that is.
Still here. I mean, a lot of us probably have cell phones that have been with us 20 plus years, and it's, useless phone calls about your car warranty being up or, whatever.
Yeah. And I've been friendly with them
Tyler,
since they were a tiny company. Renjant as well is friendly with the founders. Yeah.
Yeah, Tyler. Good morning, everyone. It's not in the case of India. It's not just the caller identification. They have been focusing a lot on women security, like that. They are the ones who are getting most number of these kind of calls from unknown people, and I mean it's a fact that way back in India, when you take a cell phone number, they literally write it down who has taken it, and then they sell this data to, I don't know, whoever it is for like $100 and stuff like that. So phone numbers get leaked the moment you purchase the SIM itself. So there is very, very likely that you get all these calls and messages from unknown people. So they have been focusing a lot on that, like for the past couple of years. Plus, they also give a pretty interesting B2B section these days, that if you get a call from, let's say, Uber Eats or any kind of delivery services or something, they get some kind of a priority, because it can be sometimes that you're going to block a lot of these calls from these kind of companies. But companies like delivery and some kind of important services, they give high priority. So they give some kind of a tick mark, just like for Twitter, and you don't get blocked because some services are important for you. And if a lot of people have blocked that services, you probably are not going to get that call. So they twisted the B2B angle also pretty well. And I think they have a huge ad network also these days. They make a lot of money with the ad network also. And I don't know what is their angle on fintech these days. It was launched a few years ago, like connecting to the UPI that you can transfer money and stuff like that. I don't know
Okay.
what is the angle now.
Yeah.
But the question to you, Tyler, is that 2 to 3 billion, I think it was 3 billion valuation. Isn't it that pretty less being a market, targeting a market in India and being Truecaller?
Yeah, but they haven't productized it in all the ways that they can. They could do. They could become a super app because they have a truly valuable asset, which is having this huge database. They could do all kinds of amazing things with it. They could get into identity verification. They could get into all kinds of interesting things with that data set that they haven't. So, but now once they IPO, they can, and whatever. So, I'm just incredibly happy for Alan and Nami and Kim and all of my friends there who I've known since the start, since they were a tiny little startup. So it's super awesome. So,
and they have been rejected multiple times by the European investors. That's also funny.
Yeah, they have Sequoia, they have Atomico, they have the smartest investors, so they got no problems. So the next one is from Newsweek that the Center for Disease Control finds over 83% of Americans had COVID antibodies before Delta. The study examined about 1.5 million blood donation specimens for antibodies between July 2020 and May 2021. 83% already had antibodies? Seems high, but why is Delta still kicking so much ass in America at the moment?
Which is not relevant anymore because it's Delta.
Yeah,
I think the thing that we have to understand is that we're going into fields of viruses all the time, so we are building up slow antibodies against it. Like every time you go out in public, you are getting exposed to some level of COVID. It's just whether or not you get infected by it to where your body is overrun. So this does make sense. And again, I'm not a doctor, but I do understand, the immunological process, and do know that this is a gray thing. It's not like you get out in public and you catch one COVID bug and you're like toast. You're constantly getting it. It's, when I mentioned when we went to Vegas and, we were in like a COVID pit, when I came back, I was dead tired. I think that was my body responding to it because I'm vaccinated.
Okay, so next one up is from Evan from Fast Company about a new type of porous pavement that will help prevent flooding by absorbing the rain. When cities are covered in pavement, they more easily flood because stormwater can't get into the ground. This alternative has tiny holes to let the water in. And then Poppy sends in one from the New York Times that Al Qaeda could rebuild in Afghanistan in a year or two, U.S. officials say. The new timeline is not a radical shift from previous assessments, but reflects the reality that the Taliban has a limited ability to control the borders. True that. And then SpaceX Inspiration 4 to become the first all-civilian mission to orbit. SpaceX plans to launch their first all-civilian mission to orbit named Inspiration 4 this week. Check back for live updates. And Katerina sends in ones about how cows are being potty trained in an experiment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, where the calves were taught to use the barn's toilet area with rewards and mild punishment significantly limiting ammonia release. Why didn't we think of this before? The next one from Shirok from The Guardian says China's cultural crackdown, few areas untouched as Xi reshapes society. Vast range of new regulations on society prompt fears of a return to tight control of pre-reform days. And the next one from Evan about soon you'll be able to buy bubble tea from a robot and pay with your face in a kiosk, which sounds like a joke, but it could be a threat to the likes of Starbucks and whatnot. If we're replacing baristas with robots in little kiosks and you pay with your face, as you can in this case. And I just tweeted that one out.
There are already robot barista for gourmet coffee.
Yep.
In Singapore and Japan, I think in many parts of the world too.
Oh man, I just saw a glimpse of the future because of that, Tyler. You know, there's just gonna be like a constant stream of almost like vending machine like robots that are just bring you Starbucks or whatever you want,
ice cream,
at that
hamburgers.
millisecond.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's what life is gonna be like.
Restaurant kiosks. Yes. So the next one is, we talked about Canva raised $200 million at a $40 billion valuation. The next one from Evan, Reuters headline reads, Russia publishes plan to tax foreign tech, promote homegrown rivals. Gee, I wonder if Russia's been paying attention to India here. As I've said from the moment India started doing this type of stuff, I said, look, watch, Russia's going to do the exact same thing. Here's the headline from Reuters. 3 months later, Russia publishes plan to tax foreign techs, promotes homegrown rivals. The Russian government published a plan on Tuesday to impose new taxes on foreign-owned digital services by November, part of a package of proposals to promote homegrown rivals. Supporting its domestic tech sector. Part of a package of proposals Moscow says are aimed at supporting its domestic tech sector. The proposed taxes on foreign tech firms has been presented as part of an internal effort to agree new global tax rules to better capture revenues generated by big tech firms known for shifting profits to low tax jurisdictions. Deputy Finance Minister said earlier this year that large foreign digital companies providing services in Russia should be subject to profit taxes, and that Moscow was involved in discussions on the like. But in Russia's case, the move also comes amid a wider effort to strengthen control of the internet and promote domestic alternatives to services offered by Silicon Valley. Told you, I told you. Did I tell you? I told you. How many times did I tell you? I told you about 10 times this was going to happen. Jesus. By the way, I'm telling you now, after Russia does this, everyone's going to do it. Everyone who can do it is going to do it. There's no reason they wouldn't do it.
They have a WhatsApp, folks. They have a WhatsApp where all the governments just share their tricks and tips with each other.
They're in a WhatsApp group together. Mark my words, as soon as Russia gets done with this, Indonesia, everybody, Korea, oh shit. Oh, we can kick out the big American tech giants and replace them with our own companies that we can tax and control and get all the data and everything else. What's the downside? There isn't any. It's all upside. Tons and tons and tons of upside. More jobs, more taxes, more control, zero downside. Why wouldn't they do it? There's no reason not to do it.
Our country is big enough for a big market.
They're all going to do it.
Like
yes.
in Russia.
So
I love the idea that there's a mailing list of like tips and tricks for your autocracy.
Yes.
See these top 7 this week.
The next one is from RCC, from Forbes. A company called IonQ delivers a new architecture and glass quantum computer chip a year earlier than expected. Good times. Bring on the quantum computing. Katerina sends in this one that researchers shine new light on molecular mechanisms in brain diseases. Rutgers researchers have discovered some of the first molecular insights into how toxic proteins are regulated in neurodegenerative diseases. And she says there are many clinical fasting studies from Russia that have shown many beneficial effects of fasting for many years. I hope that they will get more attention now. So apparently fasting is one of the keys to reducing these protein expressions. And the next one is from the 3 U.S. intelligence operatives that helped the UAE. We covered that. So we will pause there. I still have, a whole lot of more tweets to go through, but I have another engagement I have to run to. So we got to pause, and we will meet again in 5.5 hours for another tech news around the world. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful